Hello all. Thank you for being here. This is Reverie Roundtable, which we have at 8 p.m. Eastern on the dot. Here on Mondays. Here on this Twitch channel. If you watch this on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to have you here, so come around with when we're doing a live one of these things. But yeah, I'm going to introduce my guests, and we'll get started from there. Hey, Wick, our great friend, who wasn't here all of last week. Not even once on the channel. All right.
Sorry.
I felt so lonely.
It's so I had some things I had to do, but you know what? I felt empty as well. So I have to come back on and get my daily PrimeCayes, as you should as well, audience, because PrimeCayes is a great host and we love to be here. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Next, of course, Scott, who we're always happy to have here, right? Scott bringing the spice, bringing a different perspective than everyone else, and at a louder volume. Thank you for being here, Scott.
Well, you can always turn my volume down on your end. Anyways, I am Scott from Fabian Liberty. We're an anarcho-capitalist duo stream. Do politics. We do some philosophy stuff. We were reading some C. Wright Mills. So, you know, the other day, yesterday. So in case you think that there's not some Marxist literature there from time to time, you'd be wrong. But yeah, so we do a lot of cool stuff like that. Lately, we've been trying to branch more out into interviews and things like that. So, you know, Thursday we'll be interviewing Buck Angel at 8 p.m. EST. That should be fun. We interviewed a D-trans person. That was a lot of fun. You know, we interviewed Jeremy Kaufman, CEO Library, and Senate candidate for the LP in New Hampshire. So it's been fun. So, you know, a little bit of everything. And occasionally we game when we run out of content. And unfortunately, that never happens because it takes me about 4 times longer to get through a reaction view because I can't stop raging. So if you're there for that too, come check us out. Always happy to be here. Love PrimeCayes. Love this channel. Great topics.
Thank you so much.
Always has the best topics.
Thank
Moderation, you know, you could do better. But topics wise, great. Always good at picking good topics.
We're doing our absolute best here, right? But we fail all the time. Thank you for reminding me. All right, let's go to our friend Lactoid. We haven't had them here for a long time, so thank you so much, Lactoid, for coming through and being a part of this. We miss you, and look at you coming in all dapper looking, right? Looking all fancy. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing good. Yeah, I just got back from work, but yeah, I'm sorry for not being able to make the last one. I was on a boat, and I'm suntan now, so or sorry, burnt, I think is the phrase of my people. So, Lactoid, Anti-Communism United, Discord, and Twitch. Yeah, thank you for having me, Prime.
You're ever so slightly not as white as you were before. The suntan. Okay. Thank you for that.
I'm redder. Yeah.
Okay.
Don't worry, Prime. I'm white as always.
Indeed, right? But obviously, Pan here doesn't come through. Doesn't have the respect. Doesn't have the style of Lactoid. You can learn something from my man Lactoid. Pan, you're gonna go next because I need to shame you. Pan, look at you coming here with your T-shirt, right? Who comes to a panel with a T-shirt? Honestly,
you made me turn my fans off. You're lucky I'm not doing this shirtless.
No, I think the ladies are unlucky that you're not doing it shirtless. Thanks for being.
That's true as well.
Thanks for being here, though.
Yeah, of course. It's exciting. I'm Pan. That's it.
That's it. All right, just period on that one. All right, moving on to our great friend Zonia. Sonia's back with us. I was happy when she said yes to me, right? When she jumped on board, and she was like excited. I think you sent me an exclamation point. I was very happy about that.
She said yes.
Yeah, right? They usually don't. But Zonia is here with us, and we much appreciate it. Thank you for being here, buddy.
Yeah, thank you for having me back. For those of you who don't know who I am Zonia, and I do panels from time to time, and sometimes just hop on streams to talk with people. Yeah, it's nice. It's, you know, not doing as many panels as I used to, but if you want to follow me on Twitch, my username is, or my channel is Zonia Dead, no underscore. So thanks for having me back.
Thank you. All right, next we have my man, Mr. Fanatic. Mr. to you, all right? Fanatic to me. Fanatic, thank you for stopping by once again. We had a great time the other night on Saturday. We actually did a reaction video. We don't usually do reaction stuff here, but we had a really good time talking and having a pretty respectful disagreement on red pilled, like the concept being red pilled and red pill women specifically in their and the concepts they push. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thank you for being here.
Don't believe Prime for a second. I've never been respectful ever. Shout out to BB Hood for subscribing for 73 freaking months. You're amazing, bro. I love you. Yeah, listen. My name is Fanatic. I'm the trillest nigga on this panel, as usual. You guys can expect great takes from me. I think these topics are actually really, really good, and I'm excited for the conversation that we're going to have about them. I don't expect a bunch of disagreement because I know that my takes are amazing, and I think that some of the people in this panel, most of the people in this panel have brains, but I'm willing for them to for them to prove me wrong, and I can't wait for the conversation to start.
I'll prove you wrong, Fanatic.
All right. Never let me down before.
I love these guys. These guys are great. Corey is always on the right side of history, right? Being my side of history. Corey, thank you for being here once again.
No argument for me.
And actually probably might be the whitest person here, all right? I think. Actually taking lactoid space, right? Corey?
Visually only, but genetically, technically not. I'd be surprised if you can guess my ethnicity.
White passing, then, huh?
Oh,
yes, white passing.
Wow. Okay, all right. Asian? I feel bad.
Don't try to guess.
No,
It's a trap.
He asked me to.
Yeah, mask off. I'm half Chinese, part Irish, part Egyptian.
Aha.
Part miscellaneous.
Yeah.
Irish, nice.
Right continent. But yeah, thank you so much. Much appreciated. Super grateful that you reached out. I never take it for granted. I'm Corey Campbell. I'm a PhD candidate in biochemistry. I also work part-time at a biotech startup that specializes in surface plasmon resonance. You can find me on Twitch, twitch.tv/CoreyCampbell84, and Twitter and Instagram. Literally, it's Corey Campbell. Much appreciated.
Okay.
Corey, are your parents only half disappointed that you're a PhD candidate in biochem and not an engineer or a doctor, or are they fully disappointed?
They're fully disappointed because I don't talk to my parents.
Oh, you went dark with it. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well,
Nothing to apologize for. It's for the better.
Oh, Corey, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you talked to us, right? And I just want everyone to know that we are always here looking to gather people from multicultural background, right? Maybe some who aren't from the States, which we have Doobie. Doobie, our resident Mexican. Doobie, thank you for coming back. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate you. You're always a fantastic guest to have.
Thank you, my Nigerian brother. So I'm very happy to be here. Always love to be on these panels. I can't promise that I'm not going to totally derail it because I'm really irritated about the drag queen shit. But I will try not to. Okay. Prime, thanks for having me on.
Okay, I have no idea what you're talking about, but maybe I'll find
You
out.
will later. I will tell you
out.
later.
Yeah, you'll find out. Just wait for it.
I'm actually quite excited.
Wait, how did I was surprised it wasn't a panel topic. Like I was like, it's not that as a panel topic. Everyone's talking about.
Well, it will be this Sunday on Stardust channel.
I don't know what we were talking about. What you're talking about.
What I would say is don't make it a panel topic, Prime. Please don't.
It should be. We should replace one of them right now, like this very second.
No, this is not worthwhile at all.
I'm not informed enough. I didn't look at it at all.
Okay, but can someone give me a TLDR? What the fuck you guys are talking about? I really don't know.
So there was a video posted on Twitter of kids at this drag event of some sort, right?
Okay.
And there's a neon sign in the background that says it's not going to lick itself. And so the discourse is this a sexualized event? Should kids be there? Etc.
Wait, okay. It wasn't just a sign. It was the fact that they were like their asses.
There's
were
a lot.
out,
I'm giving the TLDR.
They were dancing to
right?
music about sex in front of kids, and the kids were tucking fucking dollar bills into their fucking panties.
No, they weren't.
Well,
they absolutely were. There's pictures of that. There's videos of that, and yes, it's true that some of the kids just handed the dollar bills over. So yeah, it was all things. Right? It's very very fucking bad, and you have idiots on Twitter that I was speaking to, and I never speak on Twitter. This irritated me enough to speak on Twitter.
It's true.
That were saying, oh well,
Maybe
what's
it's nothing.
sexual about this? What, you know, is it the money that makes it sexual? Is it the dancing that makes it sexual? Like pretending that this isn't a sexually charged environment because they'd like to excuse fucked up behavior by drag queen people and LGBT whatever the fucks, right? You don't need to protect all things to be an ally.
Sounds like your dog
My
is worked up about it
God.
too.
Yeah, my dog's fucking pissed off.
Poor dog.
Yeah, I wish
It's not the panel
go ahead
topic
and
for
link me.
tonight, but Doobie and I are both in unison in hating, trying to abuse children, and then everyone on Twitter celebrating it.
But
Doobie, link that to me.
Doobie,
I need
what,
that.
what does sexuality mean? I'm not sure. So
Here we
hate
go.
that.
Here we go.
Oh, boy. Just
I
send me
guess we
a.
changed the topic.
What is a woman?
I want to talk about this right now.
So
I am going to be on a panel that's going to be is 3 trans people talking about the "What is a Woman" video. So we're going to be doing that, and probably Friday.
so
I'll
yeah,
let you guys know where that is.
send me a link, Doobie, for this. I don't
Sure.
know. Throw us in the chat. Yeah.
You could just Google drag your kids to Pride, and you'll see articles and articles and Twitter feeds and
Or
everything.
just look at my tweets and replies
Okay.
timeline.
All right.
because
So
I'm in those
as usual,
threads.
I'm out of the loop with these things. So I didn't know. I
Same.
might have made it a topic, but I didn't know it was a thing. All right. So I'm assuming you guys don't want to talk about that. At least not all of you. Want to talk about that. So we'll
I
continue
don't
on
really care.
with our prepared topics. All right. Within the American prison system, inmates aren't allowed to have sexual relations with each other. However, according to a former prisoner, this tends to be expressed as anti-homosexual bias. Should inmates be allowed to date in prison? Is this a workable system? And if the answer is no, what should be the punishment for inmates who break that rule? Yeah. So there's this article. It's a woman from who was in a women's prison, and she talks about like the environment there, and that there's a lot of gayness in women's prison. Not surprised, right? That happens, but there was also a lot of shame and stigma around it, and she made the point that it was because of institutional bias, and that the institution would obviously punish people for having the relations, but also do it in a very particularly homophobic fashion. So I'm wondering, should we even have this at all? Should that be the case? Can we make some system where people can date? All right, let's go to Wick.
Okay, so this is an interesting topic because we do allow sex in prison under limited conditions. Conjugal visits are a thing, right? Like it's not that is a privilege that in some prisons is allowed some of the inmates is to have conjugal visits with their spouses and things like that. So under certain conditions, we already say we're okay with this, right? The broader question is there a way to allow quote unquote dating on a larger scale within these prisons that wouldn't turn into a horrific kind of power dynamic issue? And there I'm not so sure. I can't think of off the top of my head a good system where we could allow these inmates, some of which have been imprisoned because of domestic violence and intra-partner violence, or IPV, whatever the exact term is, intimate partner violence. Thank you. So should we be allowing them to be in relationships when they're in prison for violating those relationships? I'm not so sure. So I don't have a firm take on this, and I'm willing to be persuaded either way. That's my take.
I left the filthy centrist on this panel. All right, thank you. Let's go to Scott.
Yeah, so the entire prison system that we have in the United States is a completely corrupt and immoral one to begin with. Now, this idea that this is somehow homophobic is an absurd one. It's trying to recapture, a debate or a discussion using, certain words and certain ideals that people in our society have as a means of trying to garner attention to a specific thing in the hopes of reform. I'm either that, or it's just kind of a happy little accident from people that are kind of obsessed with identity politics. The fact of the matter is that male rape in prison is astronomically high. And again, like, you know, Wick was talking about power dynamics. You know, I don't know that that's the analysis that I would specifically use, but the idea that in our current system we can allow for relationships is absurd, but it's not absurd that that be allowed in prisons, right? It's also not absurd to recognize that our prison system is a, you know, an incestuous relationship between the state and corporations as a means of constantly putting more and more people in there. A majority of people in prison are not in there for intimate partner violence or for, you know, or for violent crimes or anything like that. They're in there for doing things to themselves. They're in there for drugs. They're in there for bullshit fucking crimes to begin with. And then the entire system is incredibly dangerous. And so many European countries, despite the fact that they've done it in a state-based way that I wouldn't necessarily support, have done prisons in a way that focuses on, you know, not having them reoffend. Sorry, I can't think of the term for it. The recidivism rate, right? Like where everything is focused on what is the recidivism rate? How do we help people? How allow them to have some form of meaningful lives? Ultimately, we're kidnapping people, mostly for doing drugs that only affected them. And then we're putting them in with a bunch of rapists, and we're putting them in gen pop with all kinds of other criminals. We're taking away all of their liberties and freedoms. We're training them how to be criminals. And then we're having a fucking conversation about whether or not some of those encounters might be consensual. It's like, it's an aside to an idea that we need to completely reform our prison system before we can even really begin to have this conversation.
Blacktoid.
Yeah, so I think prison has its purposes. There was a previous debate that was on this on your show, Prime, in which we discussed desegregating prisons based on gender. And one of my concerns was that this would, you know, turn prisons into sort of a orgy facilitator. And I think the concern does remain in regular prison as well, albeit to a little bit of a lesser degree, due to the just naturally lower rates of homosexuality compared to heterosexuality. But also, like the discussion, I think there's a real question as to the ability of a prisoner to consent. And I think the rampant rates of sexual assault in prison that may be covered up by rapist prisoners saying, oh, no, this is just consensual, you know, in a situation which, you know, it's questionable about whether or not they actually can consent given the situations they're put in to begin with, right? We already criminalize jail guards having sex with prisoners. So if we're concerned about prisoners being taken advantage of, it would seem to logically follow that we would just prevent prisoners from having sex generally. And then I think finally, you know, in my opinion, I think that prisoners should be working, right? Not sitting around, you know, not doing anything or engaging in like kind of free for all sex or again raping and getting away with it. You know, so I think those are the three reasons, you know, concern, avoiding incentive to be in prison, preventing rape, and focusing on encouraging work from prisoners. I think sexual intercourse should be banned. I looked into it. I'm not sure there's a universal law about it being banned. I know a lot of prisons have like policies that prevent it from happening. Regardless, I don't think that's important. I think it should be banned universally. And how we would punish it is how we'd punish, you know, anything else, right? Regular punishment means losing certain privileges or being assigned extra work. I don't think that there is a I don't think that there are comparisons, right?
Sure,
You know, conjugal
yeah.
conjugal visits have been basically phased out. I would just say same thing for this.
Okay, sure. Guys, can we like just speed it up with the intros, please?
Bane of conciseness.
Yeah, yeah. He's a lawyer, so. But can I get that job title though? I mean, orgy facilitator, please. That sounds like a lot of fun, right? So let's go, Zonia, please.
Yeah, so both Wick and Lactoid touched on an important topic that I was also going to touch on, which is power dynamics and the ability, whether the question of whether or not a prisoner can truly consent to in many circumstances. So that's definitely a problem. But overall, one of the things that I think is very important for our prison system to be able to do is we focus a lot on punishment as opposed to rehabilitation, and we take a lot of human comforts away from prisoners, and yet that it doesn't really work toward a direction of ensuring or like helping people evolve their into a more well-adjusted member of society, right? So the more that we take away human comforts, and some of those are like closeness and companionship with others and intimacy with others, the more that we're taking away their ability to humanize and connect with people. And I think that's a really important thing. And that's something that a lot of studies have been on. And Germany has shown a lot of success in this area with their prison system. And so I think that we should be allowing this. The question is how, and how do we do it while being cognizant of those power dynamics, and the question of whether or not a prisoner can truly consent to a sexual relationship with another prisoner who may have a power dynamic over them, either being overpowering or having, like, you know, colleagues that back them up and put pressure on them. So that's where I'm going to go with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a difficult issue for me. On one hand, I believe that people have a right to bodily autonomy and ought to be allowed to engage in consensual relationships as they see fit. But as many people have pointed out, in the context of prison, it may be difficult or even impossible to distinguish consensual relationships from non-consensual relationships. Prison rape is a serious issue, and due to the no snitching culture among inmates, blanket prohibitions on sex may be the only way to prevent sexual assault. I've heard, Zonia and other people talking about power dynamics, but I don't think that's the real issue. I think the real issue is that if consensual sex was allowed, victims of sexual assault would be pressured into claiming that the assault was consensual so as to not risk being painted as a snitch, which can result in some pretty bad things happening to you. So I agree with pretty much everyone so far who has said that this shouldn't be allowed. I disagree that it's because of power dynamics. I think power dynamics exist everywhere, and the real reason that it can't happen in a prison context is because there'd be no way to distinguish whether or not it was truly a consensual sex act. I guess one thing to add to the punishment, I think that since what they're doing, if it is consensual, isn't inherently immoral, the punishment should be something to stop it from happening again in the future, like separating them, maybe like switching cellmates if this is what happened, or finding other ways to make sure that the two don't come into don't have much contact with each other.
Thank you, Fanatic.
Yeah, I think the only reason why we're concerned about this is because of the fact that we've completely dehumanized our prison population. And the only reason why we've dehumanized our prison population is that was an extension of the dehumanization process that happened to African Americans as a whole. We already said Black people weren't human. And then now it's like, oh, they're prisoners. So then we really kind of stop looking at like ways of rehabilitating and things like that. I think that probably like the idea of like banning prison sex, it seems like it probably could be pretty reasonable. But I want to say that this was an incomplete, it's not a universal thing. It's a complete different approach because there was an explosion of HIV transmission in prison populations. And the sick and demented white prison guards and prison wardens actually came up with the notion of why don't we just start giving out free condoms as this could help prevent the transmission of HIV, as opposed to recognizing that things like conjugal visits and those kinds of things would probably be significantly more helpful. But it's easy to just think about, oh, go ahead and give these niggas something that they really don't particularly care for because they obviously don't want to have these sort of sexual relations because they're mostly heterosexual. But instead, let's just go ahead and give them condoms to encourage sex between them as opposed to doing something that would be a lot more human. Our recidivism rate is absolutely abysmal. I think as opposed to thinking, let's focus on making more work for prisoners, we should focus on more education. As education has previously been established within prisons through the Pell Grants, which Bill Clinton, the freaking white liberal, decided to go ahead and take away. And that actually reduced the recidivism rates dramatically. And they knew that when they repealed that Pell Grant for prisoners. So that's what we should be focusing on. Education, which leads to better rehabilitation, which leads to them being able to actually assimilate with society more so and pick up a trade and a skill when they get out, which would also be occupying and less privy to exploitation by the freaking plantation owners as it used to be in the convict lease system, and just extending that into the modern time. Any person that has any knowledge of history should know better than that anyway.
Ori.
Yeah, so I'm getting a small taste of how Scott feels on these panels in that like this topic like presupposes the existence of the state, or that most topics presuppose the existence of a state, and this topic presupposes the existence of the current prison system, which largely focuses on like retribution and punishment. And like we like to think that rehabilitation is part of it, but I think it's fair to say that given the current prison system, like it's hard to argue that rehabilitation is in any way part of that. Given, as Scott brought up and many others brought up, that there's a very high recidivism rate. And so, like, to sort of Scott's point, I think there's a larger conversation to be had in terms of like the structure of the prison system and how to overhaul that, as opposed to like focusing on this sort of like quote unquote like micro interaction. But I guess to answer the panel topic of like should inmates be allowed to date in prison, I would say yes. But is that a workable system given the current state of the prison system? Like, probably not, or at least not without like some really careful thought and whatever complicated policy that you think you can implement. But like, yeah, it's there's just a larger conversation to be had that I don't think this topic really touches upon that. But I'll end it there.
Doobie. Doobie, if you're talking,
Excellent.
can't hear you.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
There we go.
Yeah, I think they should be able to date in prison. I think that, yeah, that's about it. I don't know. It just seems pretty straightforward. I think that, yeah, maybe it's a case it out in public. They're like heterosexual or whatever. Yeah, I agree that we should make conjugal visits more available for prisoners if they're not too available right now. Yeah, it just seems pretty straightforward. I don't know why we wouldn't allow this. I mean, you even if like in places where we don't have the issue of them being forced to be in this place, right? You could have rape, right? So yeah, if we allow them to have consensual sex, a rape could happen. Sure, if that happens, deal with it. You know, it just seems pretty straightforward.
Okay, so the reason why we would end up pushing back against that specific.
Your mic cut off. Is that mine the only one?
No,
I can't hear
I
you.
heard it too.
Fanatic buddy?
It was Bill Clinton.
We were talking.
Oh, my bad.
Okay,
Yeah,
go
sorry.
ahead.
Yeah. So it's a two-pronged issue, and I feel like if we focus on only one of them, then it's going to create a big problem. So I would say, obviously, like if we just look at like making them legal while they don't have the conjugal visits, it leads to a problem. Because if you don't allow conjugal visits and you already have this highly violent and exploitative community because of the limitations of their sexual interactions, this would naturally lead to more sexual exploitation, and now it would provide a healthy cover for it, right? Because it'd be like, oh, I'm just gonna start raping folks and then saying like, you know, it was consensual, and there's no way it would be very difficult for you to prove otherwise, and we probably wouldn't want to spend the money to prove otherwise anyway. So the only way that you can do that is if we found some sort of way of restricting all of the sexual of getting rid of all the sexual restrictions such that they had access to regular sex and so on and so forth, then there would be less of an inclination towards exploitation, and then it would start making sense to like allow those relationships.
Well, we can't just rely on conjugal visits because a lot of people, when they go into prison, they lose their partners, right? And so they don't
That's part
have
of the
any.
reason.
Yeah, so they don't have any. Well, it's part of the reason, but in addition to just sometimes the crime or whatever other reasons that are complicating the family, and so they don't have anybody to come to them for a conjugal visit. So there needs, and they don't really have the ability to go out and date, right? So there needs to be some other avenue to that human companionship and intimacy.
Should we
So I just wanted to, and then I'll go to you, Wick. I really liked what Zonia had said before, right? So even if you don't think like sex should be allowed, what about specifically companionship? Because in the article, so the article I sent these guys, the woman described an interaction in which she had been with her cellmate. She wasn't dating her cellmate, but she was just
sleeping in the bed.
Yeah,
Just very close together and sitting together on the bed.
Yeah, just sitting on a bed and you know, talking to each other, right? Just but being close friends. And a guard pulled them aside, said like, "Hey, the officials aren't liking what they're seeing here, right? You two better knock it off and stay away from each other." Now they weren't dating, but like that put fear into them, and so they moved away. So I like what Zonia was talking about and saying like we are depriving people of just basic human interactions. So even if you're thinking, well, okay, we can't allow sex, surely not, right? But in the situation that this woman was describing, even literally a close friendship, right, would mean that you're in risk of getting punished. So, Wick.
I feel like
Yeah,
you
well,
can have
that's one of
you
the
can have
that
close
this
friendships.
Wait,
yeah, that's one of the horrific aspects of our current prison system, right? Like Corey touched on this, right? Like if we have to work within the confines of how prisons exist now, that is just one of the things that is a truism about the system. It's terrible. It's horrific. We need to change it, right? But when we talk about these like human interactions and depriving people of human interactions and any good thing, there are some people out there who honestly believe that's what prisons should be for, is to deprive as a punishment people from basic human things, that comforts, interactions, things like that. So when we talk about phasing out conjugal visits and things like that, when we talk about separating people and dehumanizing people, that's one of the ways that prisons have done it over the years, right?
But
It's
they only
very
do that
effective.
because it's
So we need to
black.
go.
If it was
If
white people, they would be having insane amounts of problems. If we were to like start
all right,
pointing out that a
nope.
bunch of white boys were out there being raped and molested, all of a sudden they would start having an entirely different tone. The only reason why they can maintain that type of energy is because it's black, and so then it's easy for them to dismiss it.
All right. So let's have a real conversation instead of fanatics race baiting racism. But like we
What?
get it, you're racist. But
Okay,
anyway,
wait, hold on, wait. What did
um,
I say that was racist? Which part did I say that was racist? If you're gonna if you're gonna levy out some sort of accusation like that,
oh, I'm sorry.
which part of that was
It-
racist?
what part of denying that other people can have any sort of empathy for a specific race, and that the United States
I
of
didn't say
America
that. That
doesn't
wasn't
have
what I said.
empathy for blacks, but they only have empathy for white people, and
I would
everything would
say
magically change if it was white
that's
people?
not what I
We
said.
get it.
So
We
no,
get
no,
it.
no. But I didn't
Everything's
say
about
that.
race.
I'm sorry. I got you. I
We
didn't
get
say
it.
that though. What I did say was that there was. I
Get
said they
it.
have
We
less.
get it. You're a
That
racist.
okay?
We
I get
know.
you. What I did
You're
say,
racist.
what I
No,
did
let's have a
say,
real
what I did say was that there was a less of
Mhm.
it. That they're less inclined towards showing empathy when it comes to black people because they are able to
The
distance
data
themselves
doesn't
from
even
it,
show
and that
that.
the
You're
data
fucking
does show that the data shows that in our response to the drug war, the data shows that, and obviously when the country
We get
decided
it.
to go
You're
ahead and
racist.
redline against everyone else, the data obviously
All
shows
right,
that
get it. Blah,
when the
blah,
country decided
CRT,
in
blah,
all of their
blah,
and all of their
racist,
various
racist.
and all of and their, like I said, in their response to the drug wars, when it was a
We
black
get it.
problem, we saw that they wanted increased criminalization and so on and so forth. But we saw that when it was a white problem, that they wanted better rehabilitation, better programs for helping people to whatever. We saw that prison used to be about penitence, which is why we could refer to it as penitentiary. And it wasn't until the harsh Jim Crow laws and all of those things started highly imprisoning black people that we shifted our focus, and then it became about exploitative work. We can
You're
look
right.
at this
Jim Crow laws
historically.
really
We can look
explain
at this.
the
We can look at this
racism
historically and
that
see the difference
white
in our
people in
approach
America
that
doesn't have
immediately
about black
changed
people.
as soon as we got to the point where black people made up the majority of the prisoners. We can
Do
obviously see
black
that.
people make up the
Anyway,
majority of prisoners? I just looked it
regardless,
up, and it seems like white people are still at like 58% of prison populations. Now, I don't disagree with you, Fanatic, that we treat black people,
I looked
disproportionately
at, okay,
badly.
I'm gonna
But
look it up. I
okay,
think
but
you're
like
right.
in
Yeah,
this
I'll
case, it
find.
seems.
1 second.
So, anyways, what I was trying to say, right, is we can't dehumanize people. And one of the easiest things we can do right now to change the culture in prison is ban the usage of referring to prisoners by ID numbers and prison numbers. Like one of the things we can do that is that no one should disagree with, right? That can make this situation psychologically better is to refer to people either by their last name or their first name, have their prison uniforms, have their names on them. Because when you take away someone's name and you make them a number, it is one of the easiest ways for the prison guards and the establishment to be able to dehumanize people. The moment people have a name and a face, it's a lot harder to treat them harshly. And so I think one thing that I think you'd have to be insane to disagree with, I think, is that we should just allow them to use their names. They should have their names on their uniforms, and guards and warden and all of them should be required to address people by their fucking names, not by their numbers.
And this is something that's when
Yeah,
I
I
mentioned
can agree with
earlier
that.
when I mentioned earlier Germany's prison system, this is something that's clearly focused on as well in Germany's prison system. Not only do they use their names, but they also get to wear normal clothes as opposed to a uniform. So they try to do as much as they can to humanize their prisoners so that there's there's a combination of things. One, if you the more that you treat someone like a monster, the more they're going to behave like a monster, right? But then in addition to that, it also creates and more empathy between, as you mentioned, Scott, the prison officials and the prisoners. So what they do is they end up actually prioritizing the well-being and health and mental health of their prisoners, which makes it more likely that they're going to be better reformed, more well-adjusted, and less likely to come back when they're released. To reducing their number, their rate of recidivism.
Let's
I think
hold
that
on. Lactoid, did you have your hand up previously?
Yeah. Um, so it was a polite pan already sort of made the point. I think that there's kind of depending on the year, you know, most prisoners overall are white, even though black people are disproportionately represented in prison. I'm not sure the motivation here is like just, I mean, maybe partially, but I don't think the primary motivation here is about like it being white people and black people. I think there definitely is like a punishment aspect about it. Um, I don't think I think that punishment should like be logically fitting what works, right? So I think work does work, right? There's evidence that prison labor is effective for reducing recidivism. But if conjugal visits do that too, um, I don't think there's actually any problem with conjugal visits.
What about the
if looking
education
it
part?
over.
What about the evidence that obviously education dramatically reduces recidivism rate? What about that? Do you think that would
Sure.
probably be better
Sure.
than work, considering that there is obviously the potential and historic exploitation of prisoners? And I think you could agree with me that, like, obviously the fact that we're only paying prisoners on average about 20 cents a freaking hour for their labor, and obviously we've seen such a dramatic increase in for-profit prisons, and the obvious point that when you put people in these sort of situations, the idea that they would be able to work, that they'd make the decision to work, and it wouldn't be from an exploitative nature, where like they're like agreeing to this because they have literally nothing else to do, or they're agreeing to this because like I mean, like, yeah, things in prison cost money and so on and so forth, and there's already a financial strain on this on their family members and all these kinds of things. I think we can obviously see why it'd be really hard to ever get to a point of like people working without there being some sort of exploitative factors here, right?
Real quick, I want to retract my earlier statement because I was actually wrong. When I looked it up, this was
You're looking
federal
at
prisons.
federal?
When it comes
Right.
to all prisons, black people, they don't make up a majority, but they do make up a plurality. So I think Fanatic's point is a little bit stronger in that case.
What do you mean? What do you mean a plurality?
I mean, like they're more incarcerated than any other race, but not quite 50% incarcerated.
Well, you also gotta be
the
you
average
gotta be
person
careful
in prison
about
isn't
population.
No,
relative to population.
not relative to
Right.
population total. More black people are in prison than white people.
So you got to be careful with that, Pan, because the Pew Research article also mentions that it doesn't delineate between white Hispanics and non-white Hispanics. So that's I guess something that needs to be looked more into. But Fanatic, to your point, yeah, I think that work. What I would like to see is work take a more restorative role. Like I think there is like you should have to pay back society. You should have to pay back your victims to some extent when you commit a violent crime.
You
And
already
so
do.
Right. Well, I don't think that when you sit around not generating money for the victim, I don't think you're necessarily paying them back. I mean, paying them back literally. I would like to see them work for the benefit of the victim. Now, if education is a way to reduce recidivism, I'm not necessarily opposed to that, right? Because I think
Wait,
we should.
you're
We
a
should.
lawyer. Do you
Hold
not
on.
know
Hold on.
about?
Hold
You're a
on. We
lawyer.
should,
Do you not know about like you having to pay
hold on.
restitution fees when you're like accused of like doing something? Like that's
Right.
literally already in there.
No,
What are you talking about?
so your restitution fees that you have to pay are dramatically lower than the cost of the crime. Oftentimes they're just in a few hundreds of dollars, or a few thousands of dollars. They're pathetically low, A. And B, a lot of the
What do you
times
mean? Like how much? How are you valuing the crime? What are you talking about?
And a lot of this is the shit I see every day, okay? And it's astronomically low when considering the crime, okay? And second of all, sometimes
it's subjective as hell. What are you even talking
sure,
about?
all money judgments are subjective as hell. They're determined by a jury, right? Except for restitution, which is like sort of
Which
the
is
judge
not.
sort of like plays in that. Right. I think
course.
so. What I'm advocating for is simply combining criminal and civil judgments, and that you should have to work off some kind of debt to your victims when you go to prison.
You already do.
And I don't think it's enough. And I think that work show like that studies show that when you work in prison, that does reduce recidivism, which I think is a good thing. If we can boost that rate even more by providing some education, and that lets them have more earning power to like make up to the horrible things they did to their victims, then I'm not opposed to that either, right? I think we have dual interests
ignoring
here.
this point the entire time. So let me make sure we're clear here. Do
That's
you
actually a
agree?
genius idea. I love that.
Do you agree with the fact that it is that prison labor has been used specifically for exploitation historically in this country.
I'll agree, but exploitation is like such a fucking loaded word. But I'll agree.
Okay.
Sure.
Specifically, with the convict leasing system was intentionally designed so that prisoners would literally end up working for plantations when
Fuck.
slavery was outlawed. We agree with that, right?
Like California's still doing that
Wait,
shit.
Yeah,
will
that's
you
right.
agree with that? You agree with that, Lactoid?
Sure. Yeah, that was wrong.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and you agree that since then, for-profit prison institutions have been created, which are also exploitative and have continued to reap the labor of people at extremely low rates, right? Like in prison. You're still agreeing with that now, right?
Yes. And
Okay, so then everything I'm saying at this point has been true. That yes, prison labor is inherently and extremely exploitative. So then trying to say, well, yeah, but it has this added benefit of reducing recidivism when we know that things like education have the benefit of reducing recidivism without all of the disgusting exploitation, then I think that makes significantly more sense. I don't know how there's even an argument here anymore. I don't think there is.
Can I ask you a question? real quick?
Pretty
real quick,
simple.
so
You set up a straw man.
So
No,
right.
Lactoid can respond.
I don't think you know what a straw man
about
is,
you.
idiot.
Yeah. So this was a straw man, right? Because like I thought it was very clear with what I proposed, right? I don't think like prison work and labor is inherently wrong. You can point to ways in which it was done poorly, or maybe is poorly done now, and I would like be against those areas. But I think that when you have evidence that prison work reduces recidivism, and we have like there's this concept where we can simply put them to work and then give the money to the people who they victimized, right? I think this like fulfills one of the goals of justice and reduces recidivism. Like this is
So
a good
if we
idea.
know that the majority of people in prison are not there over crimes to other people, the majority of people in prison are there for victimless crimes.
That's not
so then
true.
who are the people that you're going to be? Who are the people you're going to be punishing in the first place? Number one, obviously drug crimes make up a dramatic amount.
Let some other people in.
Most are violent crimes.
Do you?
Wick and Zonia.
Okay.
So
No, sorry, I said Wick,
Oh,
then
sorry.
Zonia.
I'll be very quick. I just have a question for Fanatic real quick, because you mentioned something that is true, that a lot of times that they're getting paid like 20 cents on the hour, right? It's very exploitative, the low wages. But if they were to be paid at a more commensurate rate, or a more comparable rate to the what is made on outside of prisons, would that still necessarily be exploitative? Is your issue with it merely the fact that it's for such low wages, or is your issue the fact that they cannot, it's like a Sophie's choice, like they don't really have a choice here in that there. So what's your issue with it?
I think it's both. I think it's the
Okay.
fact that one, it's automatic, like yes, that they're paying them the incredibly low wages, and two, it's almost impossible to get to a point where you can't assume that there's some sort of exploitation on the reason why someone would take these wages, considering their life, like their life prospects, and obviously their recognition that they're not going to be able to like assimilate back in society and all of those kinds of things.
Okay. Would you be more comfortable, however, with it if, for example, Lactoid's idea, right, that people would work off their debt, whatever it happens to be, to the victim, if there was a victim, right? Because I do agree with you, there are victimless crimes that this doesn't make sense for. But in the case where it does make sense, where someone has been hurt, stolen from, injured, what have you, if they were paid at a more commensurate rate, would you then be okay or open to this idea?
I think I would be open to it, but I would still say that it would probably need to be something that like if you start making it mandatory, I think it's already problematic.
Sure.
And then I would say that I still am going to be a little bit I still think like it's going to be a bit of a problem for me, only because of the fact that again that almost always it's going to be like resulting in some sort of exploitation. But if we get the pay rate fixed, then I think that does eliminate a large portion of it. But again,
Okay.
even with that, you still recognize that there are
Now, I'm
people
only
that are
asking
going to do
to
that because they're in prison.
yeah. Yeah, I'm only asking to try to kind of get where your main concern lies, but I understand that they're both a concern, and there is, when it comes to like concepts like consent, when it comes both to sexual relations and to work relations, I think are very important. The worker should be able to.
If it was a
say no.
50-50 split at $10 an hour, right? $10 an hour, 50% mandatory goes to the victim, 50% mandatory goes to the person in the prison. Would you support a bill like that? So you're still getting paid $5 an hour, and the victim of the crime, assuming there is a victim, right, in that specific situation, is getting paid based off of that same rate.
It
and you're
sounds
working towards paying off your debt. Like you're when you're working that your work is going towards the victim.
It sounds good until you start
Mhm.
recognizing like that, yeah, that there's because one, I think it already is 50% right now. Like or maybe it's 60%. I think 60% goes towards restitution and you only get 40%.
Yeah, but you're
So
getting paid like 22 cents an hour, right? So it's like
right, which is even worse. But again, the fact of the matter is the exploitation thing is still going to be there,
or
right?
you're fucking being forced to stay in prison longer so you can fight forest fires or some crazy shit,
Right,
right?
you mean like the thing that like Kamala Harris's team was like proposing in the state of California, my great state,
So,
while she was yeah. So I
so
mean these things already happen. So this is why, and I think the fact that you're aware of that means that you totally understand where I'm coming from when I'm talking about the exploitative nature of prison labor. Now I started obviously with
Didn't
the convict.
I didn't
What?
argue against the exploitative nature of
Oh,
prison
okay,
labor. I just
good.
it
I
was
just argued against the fact that you said that if it was white people, we'd care, and I said that was
Oh.
racist.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's
yeah,
crazy.
that
So do you
was
wait, to make that statement and imply that that is racist is to imply that there are no people with negative racial stereotypes that would be softer towards white people than black people, which we already know is the case. For example, we already have
No, the
evidence
data's
specific,
against you.
we already have
Data's
evidence
against
specific,
you.
we already have evidence specifically, for example, when it comes to the fact of the death penalty and the application of it is significantly higher, specifically when it's a black perpetrator and a white victim. We can look at the exact same scenario and see when it's a black victim and a white perpetrator, and all of a sudden, then the death
Yeah, the
penalty
evidence is
isn't really
against you.
discussed that much.
The
That's
evidence
not
is
true.
no.
Then
The
we
evidence
also
is
have,
the evidence is against you. The evidence is against you. It's very simple.
and we
okay.
also
Sorry,
have,
okay. Whoa,
and
whoa,
we
whoa,
also
whoa,
have,
whoa, okay.
and we
Hey,
also have.
hey,
Thank you.
Don't talk. Don't talk to me. Say your last point, but I do want to move on. We got some other people I want to get to. So get your.
Yeah,
Thank you. I'll finish that. And we also have, and we also have, and we also, because I was talking,
Oh,
and
sorry,
we also have.
Fanatic.
Thank you. Obviously, me.
Let
I was
racists
talking.
speak.
I was talking. Shut up. And we also
You shut
have,
up, racist.
and we also have evidence that there was clearly like rape wasn't even illegal against black women. The rape laws in the country specifically were only if a white person was to rape a black woman, it was not punishable by law. There were plenty cases were thrown out if it didn't specifically indicate that the victim was a white woman. It was only criminalized against white women. So we obviously can see that we as a country have historically constantly had a total difference in understanding and a total difference in empathy when it comes to the plight of black Americans as opposed to white Americans. So to imply that in any way it's racist just to recognize and discuss that I am going to move on. If you could just shut up, I was at the end of my thing. I was going to finish it.
I was talking to Scott.
Thank you. I got you.
Do we have to get to respond?
So the idea, like if we can again, so I already mentioned the convict lease system. I've already mentioned the fact that rape wasn't like punished that way. We obviously recognize that there's sentencing disparities, like literally for similarly situated people for the same crimes, even when we control for freaking priors and all those sorts of things. We've already seen that literally dark-skinned people are like in all sorts of tests have been received harsher punishment than light-skinned black people even. So the idea that colorism and racism are not there, I think that's ridiculous. The only way you'd call that racist is if you're just completely willfully ignorant.
Okay, so we're gonna go to Zonia. We're gonna do.
So we don't get to respond to the racist Gish gal.
Oh,
All right,
Roger.
we get it. You support racism,
We will,
Roger.
Sure, absolutely. That's
Base?
I mean, I can debunk him, but
so,
I mean, your moderating style is let the racist Gish
knock
gal.
it the fuck off. All right, knock it the fuck off.
Next time, shut up while he's talking, bro.
All right, so our friend Zonia had her hand up. Doobie, Pan, you were shaking her head to something. I want to give you a chance, and then Lactoid, and then Scott, Zonia.
Okay, so there's here in California, there's actually a petition coming up at the end of the year here to vote on that would be removing wording from the state constitution that allows the state prison system to mandate labor. And I'm actually for it because I think it just, you can't avoid it being exploitative. There was a period in California's history where the labor only went toward things that the state's cities needed, like manhole covers or the state itself, license plates and stuff like that. And it was still exploitative, but it wasn't as bad. But it's now become something that has turned into providing products and for-profit institutions and such, and that gets to a point where it's beyond exploitative, because it's not even just giving back to the state. It's something that is providing something for-profit institutions, which is further incentivizing various policies and policymakers to help increase the rates of, or to not pay as much attention to things that increase the rates of recidivism, or decrease, or not put energy into decreasing rates of recidivism. And that just becomes a self-fulfilling cycle of exploitation. So I think one of the things that you could do, and other countries do this, you you have I don't know how this works with restitution in other countries, but they have incentivized labor, where you can get time off of your sentence for labor. You can get more privileges for labor and lots of other things, and it also helps build skills. You can move into different industries and different skills and trades, and learn those as you do that, as you do your time. And it's something that a lot of other countries do. We don't really do that in the US as far as I know. I don't know, maybe some states are doing that at this point, but I'm not aware of any. And that's something that could work quite well. I don't know how exactly that would work with like paying back restitution to victims. So I don't know how you really factor that in.
So Zonia, I was going to mention that while with these two just kind of went at it. But bringing up California and those firefighters, right? So being a firefighter, very dangerous. It's kind of sketchy that we send prisoners. We actually rely on a lot of prison work for California wildfires to fight those things, right? But like an issue is that though a lot of prisoners still actually do want to go, they take a lot of pride in being firefighters. If you talk to them, they actually like it a lot. When you leave, you can't go and be a firefighter for like California in general. Like you don't get, they just don't allow prison work. And there's like other trades like that as well. I think in some states, like if you're a barber within the prison, you can't be a barber outside, right? Which would obviously increase recidivism rates. So if we simply allow people to use the skills they learned, right? Like just start with that. Use the skills they learned outside, then that'd be a great help for the individual. So just want to put that out there.
Amazing question, Prime. Lactoy, would you agree with that? Do you think that they should make it so that like people in California are able to, when they like the firefighters that are in prison, like that have done the work while like imprisoned, do you think that they should be able to become firefighters on the outside?
Absolutely, because when you're working in prison, one of the reasons why it's good for reducing recidivism is because you're learning job skills, and if what you're good at is like doing the shit that you could do when you get out of prison, like of course you should be able to do that. I think it's ridiculous that you can't.
Okay. Let's go to Doobie.
Fair enough.
Pan. Doobie, Pan, Black Toad, if he still wants to go. Scott, Wick.
So I guess two things. So we need to keep in mind that when we're talking about prisoners being used as firefighters, they're not out there with like the fire hoses and shit typically. Right? What they're doing is clearing debris, picking up burnt up animal carcasses, picking up trash, making sandbags. They're not like, they don't have the training of firefighters.
Cutting
Right,
away all the dry
Yeah,
brush.
exactly. Yeah. So when they get out, they can't just go right out and apply for a job as a firefighter. They don't have the training. They're basically doing labor, right? So that's number one. And the other thing, we've been talking a lot about like exploitation, right? Making these prisoners work is exploitation somehow. And that there are some prisoners who are there for nonviolent crimes. No, there's no victim, quote unquote. But like that's just, I think we're like we're forgetting the massive costs these prisoners put on the state itself. Right here in California, it's like $100,000 a year for every prisoner, every single one. Right? So if they're gonna be paying that much to keep these fucking people alive. And to keep them away from society because they're dangerous, and the vast majority of these people are dangerous. Most of these people are in prison for violent crimes, right? Most of those people in prison for violent crimes, it's not just they beat up their neighbor or something. Over half of those people are there for rape or manslaughter or murder, right? They're not like innocent like victims and shit, right? Like I know we'd like to push this myth that like Most of these people are just drug offenders, and they were pulled over by this racist cop or whatever the fuck. That's not the case. So yeah, I think it's totally fine to exploit those people, to say, hey, you fucked up. There's a massive cost associated with that fuck up because you're costing us a lot of money just to keep you away from people because you're dangerous. So yeah, you need to work it off. You need to work off. If there's no victim directly, you victimize the community. You victimize the state. Right. So yeah, you do need to work.
But that cost is dramatically lowered if you take them from for-profit prisons. I think that is part of the problem, is that like for-profit prisons have lobbied the state to, like, in order to allow for some absolutely ridiculous nonsense. And so then as a result of that, you got a bunch of people who, like, yes, like they're generating a whole bunch of money, and the people who lobbied for like increased sentences and all that stuff, they're the state has a requirement to keep them filled to a certain capacity, and so then they can demand even higher money, and then there's like very little means for them to say no. Like, we have to fill your prison, or else we have to pay fines, and then for non-prisoners. And so it just makes sense why they end up kind of like capitulating there.
Yeah, so I can understand that, but the issue is that for-profit prisons are like less than 10% of the total prison population in the United States.
Sure.
So yeah, maybe that's an issue. It's a small.
They
issue,
had been,
right?
but no, it's not.
This
No.
small issue exists.
It's not just a small issue though, because it affects the entire policy.
If you say 10% of the entire prison
less than
population
10%.
Okay, I mean, okay. Well, in California, it varies by state, and obviously California. I think we just recently put an end to for-profit prisons, but it takes time for that to be worked out, for all of them to be transferred to all of those kinds of things. But that is part of the exploitative thing. And again, I think even more evidence of the fact that this thing has been exploitative in nature, which is why I'm always going to be incredibly resistant towards the idea of like forced labor on anybody. The fact that we already have it now, if you look at like the confluence of for-profit prisons, forced labor. Like, these things together sound like, yeah, we have an incredibly exploitative system. So then anything that's going to be what do you mean?
What worker protections do you think prisoners have? What worker protections do you think there are in prison?
It's not like the prisons are going out there and picking people up off the street. These people have committed crimes. They've been convicted.
It doesn't matter. That's exactly
now they have a prison sentence, and now they're in prison. Right. So now, while they're in prison, there's a cost associated with this, whether it's paying back the victims or paying back the state or the private prison that's housing them. I think it's totally fine to use these people while they're there to fund the system.
Right. So and I get you. And if you're perfectly fine making a statement, you think it's fine to completely like exploit an entire group of people, knowing that it's like knowing
punish people with labor. Yeah.
Right. So then in that case, then you are for the idea of like what has been one, slavery. Two, we obviously recognize the war on drugs has been completely bunk. Three, we recognize that obviously this has obviously been used in the past to be incredibly exploitative of people, and it motivated them to just only do these things for profit. So I think if you can ignore all of those things, then yeah, I guess I can see your it's a passive bigotry, and I think that's evidence. That's evidence of exactly what I've been talking about.
Around every corner.
It's evidence of exactly what I've been talking about people's willingness to completely like turn a blind eye to this situation because it's black folk. I think it's painful.
Wait, that's really stupid. So first off, most people in prison, people in prison are not black, right? That's really fucking dumb. Right, I'm that I'm racist. Disproportionate. That I'm racist, and my eyes not blind. I haven't turned a blind eye. I'm looking directly at the issue. I say, hey,
disproportionately people are black.
They've been convicted. I don't think the vast majority of these people are actually innocent. So, given that we have a system that we trust, these people being convicted by a jury of their peers, then hey, I'm okay with them being punished. And if them being punished means that they need to fund the system that's keeping them alive, that's totally fine. Because in a rational society, most of these fucking people would be dead. They'd be executed for murder and rape.
And irrational. Well, that's funny that you would say that because we obviously have prisons literally around the entire world. Unless you're deeming the entire world as irrational, the rest of the world literally responds to prisoners incredibly different than the United States, with better results, with better functioning societies, with less recidivism rates. And it seems like there isn't a completely effective way of doing this that you're completely ignoring, and instead just dubbing, everybody is irrational for the idea that we would think that we should probably humanize.
I think it's irrational.
It's absolutely ridiculous. Number one. number two,
rapists and
even
murderers
if you're
will
going to say that
worry
the
about
majority of
workers'
people
rights.
that are in prison are
And we're
going to be,
spending
even if you're
$100,000
making
a year
that
to keep them
statement, we
alive.
obviously
this
know
just
that you
a
should
fashion
probably
panel at
be
this point?
considering the idea of proportions when you're talking about the
Why
amount
didn't
of
you just
people that are
interview
going to be
Fanatic?
inside of prison. And
I
clearly
don't
we have
give
it
a
out.
fuck
And
about their skin
clearly,
color, Fanatic.
clearly,
I
I
don't
know,
care about
I
their
know
skin color.
you don't, but obviously the
I know
lawmakers
you are
do, which is why we can
focused on
see
black
that.
people. I'm sure if it was
Obviously,
black
when
people
we can
there,
look at the
you wouldn't give
difference
a
in
fuck about
rates
this
that
problem at
happens
all.
when it comes to rates,
Okay,
I mean, when it
okay,
comes to rape
okay.
sentences, when it comes to the disproportionate sentencing, and when it comes to the
When
different
it comes to
applications
disproportionate
of all
crime,
the
disproportionate rape and murder, yeah, it's all the black
different,
community. It's
right?
fine.
So if you recognize that there is a difference in treatment and response
And
to
crime.
crime rates, depending
The
even for
commission of
similar,
crimes, yes.
even
New
okay,
York,
good,
black and brown, we all have to get murders.
even for similarly situated people, then if you are willing to concede that point, then you do recognize that there is an inherently exploitative nature. You do recognize that there is a difference in the way that we treat
90%
these
of the
people.
rapes and murders
so
every single year are committed
to-
by black and brown people. Do you think that has anything to do with the disproportionate prison population?
No, that's not what I'm talking about. I talked about a difference in
I know you're not talking about that.
One second, Fanatic. You can respond to this, but I need to move on after that. I got Polite Pan, I got Blackfoot, I got Scott, and I got Wick.
Yeah. So pointing out that number does literally nothing, because what we're talking about is this. The purpose of the studies is when you control for the types of crimes committed by the people, even when you control for similarly situated individuals, you're still getting this complete disparate treatment. You're still getting this disparate sentencing. So even if you want to say 90% of the people are doing something, or 90% are committed by these specific individuals, it doesn't change the fact. And obviously, I've seen statistics that said that actually the majority of sexual assault in this country is happening by white men. 75% of the sexual assaults I remember reading were coming from white men. But even still, if we're controlling for the people that are doing it 1-to-1, and we're finding differences in ratios of sentencing, then that means that we have a difference in opinion and a difference in outlook for the people who are committing similar crimes, and that's the problem.
Okay, let's go to Pan.
Yeah, first I want to say that
Then he doesn't even get to respond. Fuck.
Holy shit, you were just complaining that Fanatic was going off, right? And then I'm like, hey, let's move things along so we can get to you, so you can stop bitching about not being able to respond. And I'm like, holy shit. Like, and this coming from me, which is amazing, right? Because usually you are in Fanatic's role. You're the one everyone's responding to, right? But now the one time it's not happening to you. Oh, are you interviewing Fanatic? Unbelievable. Please.
Well, no,
Pan.
you're moderating out everyone's response.
Thank
their
you,
ability to
Pan.
respond to his shit.
Thank you, Pan.
I mean, look, it's entertaining, and that's really what matters, first of all. But anyways, as I was saying, forced labor is forced labor regardless of what you pay them. I think it's ridiculous to say that, oh, well, if we paid them minimum wage, then it would be okay. Like, no. First of all, this type of employment isn't working at McDonald's. There's no protection for these workers. They're behind supervisors who will hurl insults. There's no repercussions for them, for people doing bad things to prisoners while they're working. There's the idea that $5 a day restitution or $5 an hour restitution is going to be able to make up for the crime, and that one primary goal of the criminal justice system is restitution, is absolutely absurd. The primary role of the criminal justice system is first and foremost get offenders out of harm's way from the general public so that they're not harming the general public, hopefully to make sure that they don't go committing crimes again. But to try to change and say, oh well, it's okay to force them into slave labor because they owe us to society because they committed a crime. I mean, if you want to say that slavery is bad, I don't think you can say, oh, in this specific case, it's okay, though, because they cost money. Well, yeah, they cost money. That's it's an unfortunate part of society. And I will say that it's cheaper keeping them alive than, as you want to do, be just absolutely murdering them all at the...
Be execution, actually.
What?
It'd be justified. It wouldn't be murder.
Okay, sorry, fair enough. And executing
like
them would be more expensive. Yes, fair enough.
That's not true.
It is true. Objectively, it's true, because when you try to murder someone, they get a little more rights.
Well, so Pan,
I gotta move.
Well,
don't worry, Wick, you're on the list. Pan, go ahead, finish your point.
I mean, if people are going to object with something that I've said there, I want to hear it like that. But anyway, so as so many people mentioned before, whether or not it's a state prison or a private prison, the fact that there is a profit incentive and a motive to get these people working and have them do more work is going to create incentive for more prisoners. And we're always going to see a policy that promotes more people in jail if we're allowed to use these people as free labor. It's just obvious economics that if you say, hey, you're allowed to use someone as a slave, you're going to encourage them to find ways to get more slaves. And I think that that's even if you're like Doobie and say, okay, well, you should be allowed to take a person who's committed a crime as a slave and use them until they've repaid society. Even if you're like that, you have to acknowledge the fact that the perverse incentives are going to create more and more people who are in these positions that may not actually be as, morally condemnable as murderers or assaulters or rapists. When we see the reason that the war on drugs continues and continues and continues, one of the main reasons for that is indeed the lobbying that private prisons, do to make sure that drugs stay illegal and that prison reform never happens, so that they have more and more free labor. This would not go away if we got rid of private prisons, but even with private prisons existing, it's just going to be a huge problem. And so I don't see the amount of perverse incentives that allowing anyone to keep another person as a slave creates is just too big for us to allow it in our society. There's too much cost, too many bad things happen if we say, okay, slavery is okay in this particular aspect.
Okay, so let's go to Lactoid. Scott, then Wick.
Yeah. So just want to jump on Doobie's side. I totally agree. I mean, there's a reason why the 13th Amendment specifically has a exception for as punishment for a crime.
Yeah, because it's from the 1800s.
Well, I think that the studies show again, working is good for reducing recidivism. A, B, I don't care what color you are. If you rape a child, I'm going to make you work. If I had the power, I would put you to work, and the money that you made would be going to pay for that child's therapy sessions. It would be going to make that child's life better. I think it's absurd that people get to live off the system and leech off the system, sitting around doing nothing, while victims of their horrible crimes don't get what they are owed. As to the perverse incentive argument, that's probably the only in my opinion, that's the only good logical argument against this policy. I do think that you would have to structure some kind of policy that would prevent the perverse incentive. So you would structure some kind of policy in that the money made from working the violent offenders would some percentage of it would go to covering their living costs. The rest of it would go to the victim. And the percentage that covers their living costs can't be so high as to make the state a profit. That way, the state is still losing money, and there's not an incentive there to get more workers. And in the same breath, we're actually again reducing recidivism, helping victims, and making economic productivity. Right? It's just universally good.
But it would reduce the
Okay.
And you can call it what you want. If you want to say is Lactoid in favor of enslaving child rapists? Sure, I don't care. They will be slaves under my system. The child rapists will be, yes.
Hey, Lactoid, you win. Really quickly, I just want to say, if you're making it so that yes, that they're paid whatever, 50% goes to the whatever, and then on top of that, the amount that they're being paid is to guarantee that there can be no literally no profit from the state on the people.
Yes.
You'll never hear me complain about that. 100%, you win me over 1,000,000,000%. That'll never ever happen. But of course, you win me over.
Yeah, and you can't do that because reducing the cost in and of itself is a benefit to the state. We see this all the time with plea bargains. The reason that plea bargains are so...
Oh my god.
Lactoid just talked for 5 minutes, Prime!
He did not talk for 5 minutes. Holy shit. I want to make sure.
He was done. He had stopped talking.
Oh my god.
Yeah, he finished his point. He did, though.
Excuse me. Hey,
my bad.
knock it off. Okay? Excuse me. I'm trying to make sure that our friend Lactoid has finished their point, right? Has gotten everything out. He's been waiting for such a long goddamn time. So, Lactoid, please, are you done? Just want to make sure.
Thank you so much, Prime. I am indeed finished. Thank you.
Okay.
I really
Great.
appreciate you.
Thank you. All right. Go ahead. You can jump in for a second, but I have to go to Scott and then Wick afterwards.
Okay, yeah. Well, I wanted to say that even just reducing the cost, even if the state doesn't run a profit, is still going to create an incentive to put more people in jail. We see that right now with plea bargains. The reason we use so many plea bargains is because of how cheap it is to get a conviction. With a plea bargain, convictions cost only tens of thousands of dollars, whereas actually going to trial and giving someone their rights to trial by jury costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we already see right now is the case. We have more people in prison because of the state found a way to make it cheaper to incarcerate people. So if the state finds more ways to make it cheaper to incarcerate people, we're going to see more people in prison. And personally, I think we have too many people in prison right now. The last thing we need is more people in prison.
Can I quickly? So I want to quickly clarify that. I sort of agree with what you're saying about plea bargains. I don't think it's applicable here because in terms of a plea bargain compared to the actual cost of sentencing, you're looking at a negative and a negative, and so obviously the state's going to want to take that other negative. But I'm also only referring to implementing the system for violent crimes where there is a victim, and so I don't know what incentive the state would have to create violent crimes that they would then have to pay for just because they have to pay less than they otherwise would have to pay under your system. I don't think that makes any sense.
Okay, please, Scott, and then Wick.
Yeah, so a couple of things. First, we got to go all the way back to the Gish Gallop fanatic.
Do we?
Right?
Do we have to?
Well, yeah. I mean, we got to call out his racist bullshit for just a moment because he got to go on this giant tirade of all of the evidence, and you have to call out this thought process so that you can understand how these racists think, right? So what fanatic is using Marxist materialist dialectic process, right? He is using things that he has learned in
Oh God,
by
I'll come
reading
back
and
in an hour when
researching.
it's my turn to speak.
No, it's very simple. I get it. You guys don't like to call out Marxist trash for what it is and these racist piece of shit like fanatic. So what he's doing is he's
Scott, when did
screaming
you
and
become
screaming and
such a
yelling.
woke scold?
So he's screaming and yelling over top of people. I get it. It's all funny because we're all Marxists here, or we cozy up.
No, because you kept interrupting me the entire time. That's why I did it.
So he goes on. He's like, we know this, we know this, we know that, we know this, right? And what he's doing in every single instance is he's using univariate analysis and not talking about the study or how those things are done, and then quickly moving on to the next one and switching between historical analysis and univariate analyses. This is 100% how you use the dialectic process in order to push your racial theories forward. So what he's doing is, instead of actually talking about what the data shows, he's instead using studies or using certain statistics as a means of then allowing you to assume that race is the issue here, instead of actually breaking those things down and having a conversation about why each statistic exists, and then uses Jim Crow era things or things that happened in the past as a means of proving that whites today are have this disproportionate, unempathetic response to blacks.
But I talked about whites today.
The actual facts of the matter is that among all racial groups, white liberals are the only group that have an out-group preference. Conservatives do have an in-group preference, but they have less of an in-group preference than every other racial minority in the United States. So, technically speaking, those least likely to be racist in America are white people. Those most likely to be racist are black people. And this is something we can actually look at from in and out group preference. But instead, he wants to do things like racial bias tests. And he wants to say, well, because there's a disparity in the numbers, this proves something. And again, that is the dialectic process that takes one portion of it, blows it out, and then attempts to reorder and restructure the power dynamics. And then, but always claims victimhood and always claims racism until the mythological construct of race is finally destroyed. Now,
Scott, do you believe the majority of liberals are white?
Let him.
Well, no. Fanatic can't respond, right? Because I didn't.
Yeah.
Like,
well, hold on. He did interrupt me the entire time I spoke.
We can put him in a round table, and we can get to
did do that.
Later.
Oh my God!
He did do that.
Shut the fuck up with the complaining. Okay, look, Scott.
I'm just returning the fit.
Scott, hold on. Scott, this is.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
It's your turn. I really want to hear from you.
There you go.
Please.
Hey, but that's all. I can't.
Yeah. So then, again, I just want to point out one thing. Doobie keeps bringing up the cost of imprisoning people, and that is true. The problem is that you also have to look at preventative costs, right? If you are able to spend more money in prisons in a way that makes the recidivism rate go down, then you reduce costs because you don't have further individuals back in prison, right? So sometimes when if we're going to do just a specifically cost benefit analysis, we also have to recognize that anything that reduces recidivism likely reduces costs in the long term because those people don't reoffend. And then lastly, we keep talking about the perverse incentive nature of private prisons and how they lobby Congress and how they attempt to get the war on drugs maintained and things like that. All of this is true, but the problem is that you're zooming in too close in our current system instead of realizing that it is the state-based system of prisons and the monopoly on power and violence and the fact that we kidnap people and put them in jail despite them no longer being an immediate threat that is the actual problem. If you wanted to solve this problem, you would fully privatize policing and you would fully privatize prisons and you would make all prisons mandatory and you would give people the ability to exclude anyone from their private property that they wish and make it so that people only go to prison if they want the ability to return to other people's private property by proving that they have fixed or cleaned themselves in some regard, and then just excise them from the community, excise them from your private property. It is the state that has a corrupt incentive structure, because it's the state that doesn't give a fuck about money, because the state can tax you, and you will stupidly vote for more people to go to prison because your neighborhoods will magically be safer. That's my point.
You're muted,
And what a
Fanatic.
point it was. But back to the actual topic at hand. There's a couple things Pan said that I'd like to address, right? And he went through and he talked about a lot of the problems with the current way that we do prison labor, and I'd agree that those are problems, right? The fact that they have no worker protections, the fact that they can be exploited like they do. But we can mitigate this, right? This is an unsolvable condition. There's obvious ways that we can go and mitigate the risks to prisoners, because we know that work, at least in the prison system, can lead to reduced recidivism. There is not only negatives to this, there is good too. So the fact that we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. We want to keep the good while getting rid of or mitigating the best we can the bad. Like, prison is never going to be a perfect place. I can't think of a way we can get it so it's never going to be, there's never going to be any inequality, any exploitation, things like that. Prisons are, however, a necessary place. And given that they are a necessary system, despite what Fabian Liberty's rant was all about is privatizing
You've
all
known
the
me for a
prisons.
year. You can get my name.
Bullshit, right? And so I'll call you by your ID number, right? That's what I'm going to do. Fabian Liberty from now on. But regardless,
Number one. That's my ID number.
So when we talk about these things, like, we can't. I get you. I understand that right now it's shit, but it doesn't have to be shit. We can improve it, and we can make what works about it work even better. And so just to dismiss it all out of hand and say there's going to be perverse incentives, first of all, I don't think you've proven that. You've asserted it, but you haven't shown any evidence, right? Like, I think Lactoid made a very good point here when he said that, again, these things cost money. And so the best way for them to reduce costs in these things is to actually get less prisoners in this case, because I guarantee you, in public prisons and state prisons, they ain't making a lot of money off their prisoners, right? In private prisons, it's a different story, but in public prisons, it's not the case.
I mean, you can say that there's a way to make it better, but I would love to hear how you can make it so that a place where prisoners are ripe for abuse from prison guards, right? Prison guards are in a place of power. Prisoners can complain to anyone who they complain to, maybe the warden, but the warden's going to always side with the prison guard. So the idea that we can make a system where there's an inherent difference between the people who are ripe to be abused and the abusers, and there's an inherent power. I don't really like power dynamics and analysis, but this is a case where you can absolutely use the analysis, and it's so clear that it will be nearly impossible to create an environment for prisoners to work where they are protected from abuse from the people watching over them, like prison workers.
Yeah, but you can mitigate that, right? You can mitigate that to a
Not
good
much.
degree, to an acceptable degree.
I mean, if you have if in order to say you can mitigate it to an acceptable degree,
I believe we
know
can.
what you're.
Like,
Well,
I'm not an
how?
expert on this. Like, look, I'm not a prison expert, right? I only went to juvenile once when I was a very young man, but outside of that, I don't have much
You're still very
experience in
young, Wick.
prison. Oh, it's true, young at heart. But like, I have a full confidence that if we wanted to, right? If we had the will to do it, the political will to do it, that we could. Other countries have in large cases, right? Like, this isn't a unique issue that no one's been able to do better than us. Like,
Yeah, but
American
they all do it because they
exceptionalism
don't have the
is.
race problem that we do, and that's
Well,
what I
it's
was
not.
been getting at this entire time. Like, you and I both know that, like, in these other countries, the reason why that they're more willing to, like, try to find actual ways of, like, fixing this is because of race, which is why we saw a dramatic change in the way we responded in prison, specifically once race became it. It used to be 90% of prisoners were white. Then, as soon as they did the Jim Crow laws, and then as soon as black people were freed, then at that point, then now prison became black, and then the entire way, the whole entire process was dramatically altered. And that's we see these kinds of things. We know what it is. I don't know why we're running from it.
Well, I would agree with you that race plays a role. I just don't think I agree with you that it plays the major role, at least not today, right? I
That's
think
wild.
that where we part ways.
Yeah, I
Let's
don't
go
know
to
how. That's crazy.
let's go to Corey, and if Zonia or something wants to jump in after that.
Yeah,
anyone else?
so I echo a lot of the sentiments that Polite Pan brought up in terms of like the incentive structure. But to address Scott and their point, so like I'd agree with your original point that humanizing prisoners is like a good thing and not addressing them by their numbers. And that if we actually have any interest in hopefully rehabilitating people and getting them back into society, that they should be humanized, which is why like I would also not want to rob them of potentially human connection, which includes, potentially companionship in prison. But I also find it interesting that also at the same time you seem to be making the argument that you want to humanize them in one aspect, but then it's okay to exploit them in another aspect when it comes to like forced labor. And like I'm curious, like, do you not see exploitation of labor as dehumanizing?
I never supported that the labor be forced.
Okay,
Only
so,
that the option be made available.
So, yeah.
well, so I
He
would,
doesn't even think prison should be forced, let alone forced labor inside prison.
I was the
against-
one.
like,
I
come
was
on.
I was the
Don't
one in
entertain his
favor.
nonsense.
I was the one in favor of the forced labor.
Okay, but yeah, fair enough. Then I retract that statement. But even if it's voluntary, I would assume, perhaps mistakenly, that it's still exploitative in nature, in that part of their wages are being extracted and being given to someone else.
The entire prison system is a contradiction because the entire prison system is
Sure,
kidnapping
yeah.
of people that are no longer an immediate threat to persons or property.
Well, yeah, I echoed your original point in terms of there's a larger conversation, but I think you do agree that it's exploitative, right?
Corey, don't entertain him. He's just gonna go into his nonsense. Like,
So what do you guys mean by exploitation? 'Cause I feel like he's throwing this word around a lot, but I
So
don't
I
think
wanna-
this qualifies as exploitation.
Well, I'm trying to work within Scott's framework of like, especially given their views on labor and how one's wages, should be tied to like their labor.
Well, if it's voluntary,
perverse incentives, I think, is the better direction to go instead of throwing exploitative around, because that'll go down a rabbit hole. But like,
sure.
how do you
I'll
divorce
let
the
you
two?
finish, but then I want to jump in.
No, I have no problem like dropping the point if using the word exploitative is whatever too charged. I just wanted to like push back on like Scott's point in terms of it seems like on one aspect, therefore the humanizing of the prison population, but it seems like in another aspect, like I think there's a dehumanizing effect given what they prescribe. They prescribe.
I'm a little bit confused about why it would be exploitative if they were given the option to choose to work and decided to work. That seems
because they're kidnapping victims.
Other than that, like
than
if we're not operating in the all prisons are kidnapping facilities, if we're operating in the framework that, I'm sorry, Scott, but 8 of the 9 people on this panel are operating in,
call it what
I
it is,
would
in the
say,
framework of the real world.
I would say that I don't see what's inherently exploitative about letting them choose to work for somebody if they want to. I mean, if they don't have anything better to do, and they decide, yeah, this is worth my time. That's not inherently exploitative.
Yeah, but the reason why it's exploitative specifically in this case is because you've already like taken away their freedom, and I mean they don't have freedom. Number one, number two, they obviously recognize that they're not going to have any way of like kind of assimilating back into society. Two, like there's literally nothing for them to do. Like they're just sitting there bored, like with whatever. We're not allowing them to get educated or anything like that. Like I think for all of those reasons, it becomes incredibly exploitative. Obviously in certain places it's obviously been forced, so like there's just all of these different things that we see like that have historically been exploitative and are currently, if it's currently in our state, you can have mandated in California, the most populous state in the union, you can have mandated like mandated freaking labor, like that is automatically exploitative. When you have for-profit prisons, that's exploitative. There's so many ways. I don't know how we're questioning it.
Well, I was only questioning the mandated part, right? Like, I agree with everything you said. I want there to be educational opportunities in prison and that stuff. But if one of the options alongside education is to work, I don't see a problem with that.
If it's non-compulsory, you still have the problem of, as was brought up, your freedom has been taken away. So there's an atmosphere of like coercion, right? Like you don't really have much of a choice. So
pressures are being pushed on you that normally would not exist.
Yeah.
What's wrong with that?
They committed crimes.
Now the perverse
these are
incentive
like
that I
criminals.
wanted to talk about, though, is the perverse incentive. Even states have to deal with perverse incentives because states, many budgets don't necessarily all tie together at the top with one person paying attention to them all and deciding, oh, this is gonna, this is too expensive for us, so we can't, so we don't want to do things that raise the price of prison, of housing prisoners for us. That doesn't really happen. What you have is you have these individual budgets, and you have like the city or county of such and such has this budget, and it has planned its budget based on certain assumptions, like having prisoners from the state prisons come and clean up the roadside garbage and clear out the brush and the fallen trees and the cut down trees, and tilling, the earth so that we don't have ground that will burn during the fires, and all these other kinds of things, right? So there's this expectation that, oh, we're going to be depending on all of this prison labor in order for us to be able to do what we need to do for the year, right? And so that right there is already a perverse incentive, because as soon as you try it, because at that point there's a desire to hang on to that, because the city and county, they don't want to go asking for a bigger budget to hire more people to do those things that prisoners are doing for them for free.
Wait,
Right.
okay, but we need to keep in mind here, like, how much these prisoners cost. Like I said, here in California, and in other states too, but here in California, it's over $100,000 a year. You're not going to earn $100,000 a year or spend $100,000 a year paying somebody to clean up the park, right? So like the profit being made, if there's any profit, is very, very, very fucking minimal. And I think it's totally fine for them to make profit, because you got to keep in mind this shit costs money. We're spending a lot of money to keep these people fed and safe and housed in these fucking prisons and away from society for what they did. This is literally a punishment. I don't think it's unfair to force them to work off the debt that they're accruing. I don't understand what the issue
This
is.
is where focusing
We force
on
them to be there in the
reducing
first place.
recidivism is a boon here, but you have perverse incentives to not do that because you're depending on the labor, right?
No. Okay, I don't think it's reasonable to say that, hey, the state's counting on people to come back into prison or to stay in prison longer, because otherwise they need to hire somebody for $25,000 a year to clean the park, versus paying $100,000 to keep a prisoner in
It's more that they're
prison.
not motivated to make changes because the way things are working right now works for them, and it doesn't matter what the cost is to house the prisoners, because
They
these
just
budgets are
increase
all
taxes.
Wait,
Oh, no, they
wait,
increase taxes, or
there's
they
more
increase
than
like
that.
like
There's
park
more
like
than that. One
traffic
hand-
tickets and shit.
One hand
Like,
isn't managing what the other hand is doing, so it doesn't matter if your budget is massive for this thing over here, and over here you've got a dependency on the fact that that budget is massive. It doesn't matter. There's no connect. They don't pay attention to that, right? So you're pretending as though there is like some godly entity at the top who's looking at all the individual budgets and then going and saying, okay, we need to reduce this here and deal with that there and this here. It doesn't work that way. It's all managed independently.
no, I think you're pretending there's like malicious people at the top that want to keep
Not
people behind
malicious, they're
bars
just not
so they
incentivized
can
to
clean
make
up the
positive
parks and clean up the
changes.
roadsides and shit.
No, it's not. It's that they are not incentivized to improve the system.
Because it's black people.
Which is why we
It's
need
not black
for
people.
profit.
First off, it is not black people.
That's exactly what it is, and you and I both know that.
No,
You
I
can
know
argue
that
all
it's
you
not.
want
I
to.
know
I
that
know
you know
that
it's
you know
not,
better.
but I know that you wouldn't give a fuck about any of this if black people weren't involved somehow.
I would probably still care. I mean, like I fight for trans
Probably.
rights and things like that.
I would
Like I
probably
mean,
still care. If
You probably
were
still care
being
about people
exploited.
despite the race.
Well,
Yeah,
here's the
no.
deal. Like, no. You know what, Doobie? That's an amazing point that you brought up, and I think it really does give that I think it helps elucidate exactly what the issue is here. For me, I can say probably only because it's hard for me to divorce race from it, because race has obviously been tied to it, and I'm black, and so I'm seeing the exploitation of my people. So what I can say is, I imagine is that maybe if we were to completely eliminate those things, then maybe I might still be able to maintain that same energy. Maybe. I don't know. I've never been in a situation, because since I've been born and since this country has been founded, there's always been this ever-present exploitation. So it's really hard for me to see it outside of the lens of race. You guys can conveniently do so to your own ignorance, because it doesn't actually affect you, like we have always tied a blind eye towards the poverty issues in the black community, towards all of the exploitation when it came to the mortgage crisis, and when it came to reverse redlining and all of those things. You guys have the ability to do so, and it's so crazy, because whenever I start actually bringing up the issues to you guys look at it like, no, you're crazy. You're making this up. It's nuts. Y'all don't know what you're talking about. And I get why you get to have that ignorance, because it doesn't affect you.
Okay, Fanatic.
is
I don't know. I don't know why we need to.
real
start
quick.
with that.
This is
No, I want
what
to hear from Doobie. I don't care about you, Fabian. Doobie, what were you going to say? Go ahead and finish your point, please. No one wants to hear this idiot. Like, go ahead. Doobie, can you respond? I was talking to Doobie. Doobie, can you respond?
Zonia was making a point.
This
Okay.
is what
Oh my god.
Volkism
Oh my
looks
god.
like. In case you're curious what Volkism looks like that led to Nazism, it's fanatic. That's what this looks
We
like.
just keep
My
using
people
words.
being exploited. My people are oppressed. My nation of people in and of themselves. And I
That's
couldn't
so funny.
imagine what my empathy might be like for other races.
Okay.
No
let's go
different. No
to-
different than Nick Fuentes.
Doobie,
You
you can.
tried it.
Oh my God, Doobie, you can respond if you want to. Then like,
Thank
there's
you.
this- so oh god, I don't even know where to start. Okay, so Fnatic, you're not the only person on the panel who's affected by like racial bias or that's where systems have been put in place to oppress your ancestors and all this kind of shit. Okay, I'm the child of immigrants from Mexico, right? So I'm sorry, the grandchild of immigrants from Mexico, right? They came to a very racist nation, very little to their name, and with lots of racist policies. Grew up in fucking East LA, surrounded by racism and racist cops and shit like this, and in poverty, in the fucking ghetto. That's where I come from, right? So I'm not saying, oh well, you guys should just ignore the race because it doesn't affect you. None of this affects you. The policies don't affect you. The oppression doesn't affect. It's just that's stupid, right? I think the reason I'm able to separate race from this is because I haven't built a victim narrative and an identity around my skin color like you have, right? And this is kind of points to what Scott was saying earlier, right? I'm brown, but I don't have this in-group preference that you do, right? I think an in-group preference is very strong, like racial identity generally is very strong within Black people in the United States. Thinking hey, that's the result. That has to happen because Black people are targeted because of their race, and that's a fair thing to argue. Right, but I when I say my people, I don't think brown people. I think Americans. I think people in this fucking country.
Okay,
right?
but
So,
Doobie, do you think it's
so
fair
please,
that
so if somebody were to ask me, hey, would you still care about the problems of the prison system if brown people weren't in there? I'd say yes, obviously, because Americans are there. Americans are my people.
But
For you to say,
though.
probably that you would probably care if there weren't Black people, that I think that indicates
It's
that there is some
folkism.
kind of like racial bias there.
Oh, no. For sure, I have a racial bias. Obviously, my racial identity is incredibly important to me because I am Black. And racial identity has been necessary to be important to me because that's all we have. They've taken away all other forms of ethnicity. So as a result of that,
there's more to you than being Black.
They've
course,
taken it away.
Obviously, there's more to me than being Black. I also happen to be a musician. I also happen to be an intelligent man. I also happen to be quite girthy, but I don't try to identify myself by my penis. I try to identify myself by the things that I think that are most readily available and most readily apparent by most people. For example, most people when they see me, the first thing they're going to say is I'm Black, right? So that's why that's going to be incredibly important to me. I think whether I keep my mouth shut or not, I know that that's what they're going to see. Anybody with the brain can see past this Dullard's ridiculous points. My point being, Doobie, it's easy for you to say, I don't really put that much stock in race and all of that stuff, when half of the time Hispanic people get to identify as white. That's why. So that at the end of the day, yeah, you are still part of that thing that doesn't have to actually consider it. It's really crazy when you say, yeah, you think about, I get you. Yeah, sure. But I get how you can always make those statements that like, yeah, man, you don't, you guys see race in everything. And it's like, yeah, well, because that's kind of been forced on us because actually everyone else sees race in everything. And we're just literally recounting the world as it's actually, as we're seeing it. And it's like you guys are almost trying to imply that we're injecting race into places where it's not there. When you and I both know that that's just not true.
I think you literally injected race into this conversation topic right from the start.
What they do.
Nobody else.
We're talking about prison.
You injected it. Yeah,
no, it's not that I just
Black people.
But when I hear prison, I get you. But when I hear
because
prison,
maybe you're making assumptions that Black people are more likely to commit crimes, so they're more likely to be in prison.
No, that's not it. When I hear prison, I'm more likely to hear it because obviously prison reform has been literally part of the Black Caucus's talking points. It's been literally the thing that's been marched for since the Civil Rights Movement, since before the Civil Rights Movement. It's been one of the largest talking points of the Black community for God knows how long. So yeah, of course that's what I'm going to be able to. I'm going to point out to first. That makes all the sense in the world, doesn't it?
Fanatic, no, because there have been movements, there have been organizations centered around prison reform and prisoner rights that are totally disconnected from race because that issue is disconnected from race, right?
But it's not.
Yeah, it is.
How do you disconnect the two if we obviously recognize that a crazy disproportionate amount of Black people are put in prison? It is crazy disproportionate. Oh my God. Okay, I don't know what the freak you're talking about. Numerically, it is. Furthermore, and then secondly, obviously, if we recognize that, like literally, we can see the differences in sentencing disparities based on Black people. We see an entire war on drugs that was specifically aimed and used and targeted as a tool to criminalize and punish Black people. We see it all the time. We see how bad this criminal justice system is. You
black
knew
men,
it. That's why it's
brown
hard.
people.
That's why it's
We
hard
gotta-
for me
we
to
gotta-
sit there and
so
then just.
Wait, hold on.
I-
Please,
I-
black
I-
and brown
Statistical
people
material
and white
univariate
leftists.
analysis.
So
Hold on,
That's
black
what
and
I
brown
get.
people and white
You can
leftists, not just
see
black people.
this shit.
I want to
Yeah,
let
but
in. I want
disproportionately black people.
I want to let in.
Statistical
I
univariate
want to let
material
in
analysis.
lactoid.
What it is, folks.
I
You're
wanna
just
let
saying
in-
words.
I want to. Oh my god! I want to
We're
let
all
in
just saying words.
Oh my god! Shut up! I do want to let in our friend Lactoid. And just for the record, Doobie's skin is brown, right? His Mexican heritage, those shows through very strongly. Okay.
I'm like
So I'm gonna get
36% indigenous. Okay, you
Yes.
guys, all of you owe me reparations.
that clear. Oh my God.
Yeah, yeah, but 60% of Hispanics identify as white. That's the problem.
I'm brown. Like people
yeah.
look at me, they see a brown person.
Yeah,
I got
you're
you.
white
That's
adjacent,
fine.
Yeah.
But that doesn't
White
change. That
adjacent.
doesn't change that.
Well, you can't say the
Lactoid.
problem doesn't affect him if he's not white passing, right? Like if Doobie was some
Well,
white
if
passing
the problem was
person-
based only on color, then maybe. But the problem is based on race, and so when they specifically know that it's black people, they respond differently. So then, yes, the problem.
But you
doesn't
mentioned
affect you the
earlier. You
same.
mentioned
Technology
earlier
of-
that they give
technology
lighter
of
skinned
race.
black people less.
This is what- this is
Yes,
what
lighter
race
skinned
is.
black people. We didn't say lighter skinned. We didn't say lighter skinned people in general.
You don't think that can apply?
Specifically, when you control
Fanatic
for
is a
race,
racist,
specifically,
crypto-fascist piece of shit.
specifically, when you control for race in those situations, they treat lighter skinned black people different. That's the problem that I'm bringing up. So then, introducing or injecting a brown person here, they don't even fit within that study.
Okay,
They're
okay.
not the same.
So
It
I
sounds
really
very
I want
anti-fraud.
to raise the voice of a white man, right? He's been silenced for too long. So Lactoid, please. I know your people have not had enough chance to speak. So your turn, and then our friend
We've been
Zonia,
through a
please.
lot. No, we've been through a lot, and Zonia, like it's convenient because my question was actually for you. Again, the perverse incentive, going back beyond the race thing, the perverse incentive thing. I guess the difficulty I'm having with understanding this is because as I provided with Pan, like I feel like you can provide some caveats that can prevent this, right? The two caveats that I'm providing is one caveat: in order to force the labor, there needs to be a identifiable like victim of the violent crime, so like a rape victim or like a murder victim or like an assault victim or something like that. Okay, I'm not sure the state. I'm not sure like I'm not. Can the state have a perverse incentive to compel people to commit murder in order to have more workers? I'd be very skeptical of that happening. Two, we have prison labor, and it doesn't seem to actually. I mean, with exception to private prisons, which they do lobby Congress, that is a problem, right? But in the other senses, when it's not based on that, I don't think it leads to those problems inherently. And the third, I think, point is you can just simply adjust the compensation so that it still costs the state money to imprison people, and just all the other money goes to the victim, right?
So
Like you can work out a system in which there is no perverse incentive, couldn't you?
No, because the perverse incentive is still like one of the things that I mentioned is that there's not much motivation to improve the conditions of the prison and the system to reduce the rates of recidivism, right? Because of perverse incentives. They're not motivated to make that change when they're benefiting from the fact that it's not that it doesn't have low recidivism, right? So you could still like there needs to be a big focus on how it is that we reduce recidivism and ensure that we're churning out people who have become better adjusted, who can be contributing members of society. And that's where there's just not a lot of focus, not in US prisons.
So I
I wanna-
agree with that, but couldn't you just simply like throw on like, yeah, we want to get people like back on the straight and narrow. Prison labor, there are studies that show that prison labor does reduce recidivism, right? So that's a good point. B, we can implement systems to like make sure this
Trades
only
reduce
uh,
recidivism, not
we-
labor.
So-
Trades.
no prison labor.
Skills,
No,
skills and trades.
Well,
Lactoid,
hold on.
you're
So no,
100% wrong.
no, it's two.
conflated.
It's two things. It's two things, right? So there's two reasons why it does reduce recidivism. The studies indicate that you're right. Like the skills you learn while doing the job, which is one of the best ways to learn how to do a job, absolutely contribute to your your ability to do a job once you get out. Which is why I agreed, by the way, before with Fanatic when he was saying like, well, when they get out, should they be able to go do jobs? Of course, they should be able to go do jobs because that's what they were doing while in prison. That's like what they should be able to do to be productive members of society again. And then also, Fuck, I think I lost the second point, but I mean I think the first point still holds very strong.
Labor is what you're talking about.
Oh wait, you're just wrong. I'm looking at it right now, and they're saying that there's plenty of studies that suggest that there is no relation between work release and recidivism.
Yeah, what it is
Between work
actually-
release or between like prison labor?
Well, work release, which is a form of prison labor.
The thing is that one of the things that I haven't looked at this in a while, but there was a study back around 2014.
Studies that I've seen show otherwise.
That was showing that what it is having that productivity and that activity, as opposed to being constantly exposed to the more negative conditions of prison. So being able to break away from things like constantly looking at bars and sitting around with a bunch of other people who are also convicts,
that helps too,
and being able to actually go and do something that's productive actually helps improve them psychologically and improve their ability to not become more hardened while in prison. And that doesn't have as much to do with the labor as it has to do with being active in a productive, engaging exercise of any kind, really.
Why can't we kill two birds with one stone, right? If we can teach people skills on how to work by having them go do the work, and if they can learn like the value of hard work by going to do the work, and we can like give the money that they generate to their victims, which again, if we narrow it to violent crimes, we're talking about like rape victims, victims of child molestation, victims of like brutal domestic abuse. And like we simply transfer the money that they make by working to those victims so that their lives are better. You can pay for their therapy. You can pay for their rehousing if they're domestic abuse victims. Oftentimes, one of the biggest problems with domestic abuse victims is they can't find housing, right? I mean, if your abuser has to pay for your housing, it theoretically would make it a lot easier to find housing, wouldn't it?
Perhaps if all of the funds went to the victim, that would make sense.
Sure, I'm okay with whatever split.
Lactoid. So there is one thing that I did want to nitpick, because you said I don't see how the state could have an incentive to increase crime as a means of like late. And then the problem is that you were correct. The state doesn't have an incentive to increase crime as a means of doing labor from those prisoners. But the state absolutely has all types of incentives to increase crime, because the state is not a company. It's not the president isn't a CEO. None of the people that work in government are owners of the country, owners of the nation, or owners of public property. What they are is elected officials. And so what do you need to get elected? Well, you need votes from people, and you need money from other organizations, unions, corporations, Wall Street, whatever. And so if any of these corporations or companies or the people can be seen to have a vested interest in something that disproportionately doesn't stop crime but actually increases crime, then they absolutely can have an incentive. I think a great example of this would probably be like the 1994 crime bill, right? It's a dismal failure. It didn't work. It likely increased crime because of all of the tough on crime actions that made everything fucking worse. But they had an incentive to do so because they wanted to get elected, and people were feeling like tough on crime at the moment was something that could get them elected, right? So I just want to point out, and it's not like, the CIA or the FBI haven't engaged in false flag operations to try and get us to go to wars for profit before, right? So it's not like you couldn't see the same thing with private prison industries or with other companies that benefit from people being in prison, lobbying politicians for, let's say, increased tougher crimes on drugs or things like that allow more people to be in prison. I just want to point that out, that incentive can exist, but not as a direct one-to-one incentive to, like, getting someone to clean up the parks.
Right, but you could again limit this by policy. You could only apply this to violent crimes. If you're concerned about, which I think is a valid concern, about like the state starting to criminalize like a whole bunch of
For sure, I'm not disagreeing with your whole point. I'm not disagreeing with your whole point. I just wanted to say that one thing, like the perverse incentives from the state to increase crime and put people in prison do exist.
Look, I'll be frank. Like, I think that victimless crime shouldn't exist. Like, it shouldn't be even a category, right? If there is no identifiable victim, it should not be illegal. Like, that would be, if I ran the legal system, that's how it would be. And so the only prisoners, like every prisoner would be in labor, because all of them would have like identifiable victims, like where they raped them or like shot them or something along those lines. Like, those would be the people